Hello, I'm Jim Canfield, CEO of Renaissance Executive Forums, and I'd like to welcome you to Strategies for Success 2011. I'm really excited today to be with Jack Stack. Jack is CEO of SRC Holdings, formerly known as Springfield Remanufacturing. And probably as importantly, he's the founder and thought leader behind the great game of business. Jack, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Jack, the story of the great game of business and SRC it's an American success story. Could you tell us about those early days and how this whole thing got started?
Well, I'm going to go back to one of the earlier recessions, which is around 1983. But 14 years prior to 1983, I worked at a very, very large company, a Fortune 500 company called International Harvester. I was in manufacturing. I grew up in manufacturing. I was manufacturing a very metric-driven business. We were taught all the aspects of quality control, and we were taught the aspects of delivery. And the company was roughly 100 years old and ran into a real financial crisis. When we hit the wall in 82, combination of global competition, combination of old-style management, combined with the fact is that we couldn't change because we were so deeply rooted into a confrontational style leadership. We took on a serious amount of debt. We owed 200 banks $6 billion. Interest rates hit 22%, and we were hemorrhaging cash. And I was running a little factory in Springfield, Missouri. I had had a great career within the company. They were very good to me. I finished my education there. They paid for my education. I went to every program you could have, whether it was Ollie White's School of Management or whether it's consulting assignments. I mean, they were tremendous to me. But we were dying, and we had to sell assets, and we began to close factories. And we went on one of the worst layoffs in the history of a company. We laid off 1,000 people a week for 2 years. Went from 115,000 down to 11,000 people. I had one of the 17 manufacturing plants in the world, and it was in Springfield, Missouri. And I had been transferred down here in '79 to close the factory and fell in love with the people. Just fell in love with them. Had a tremendous entrepreneurial, non-union type of people that says, give me the tools to do the job and get the hell out of my way. That was their attitude. And we just had a tremendous time. From '79 to '80, we ran numbers. We went, any goal that they had inside the company, we wanted to exceed, and we did. And all of a sudden, then we were the headlines. We were on cameras. We were on print. The whole idea was that, the company was not going to survive. We were going to be the first big company that was going to take the hit. I would walk the floor. People would ask me things like, should I get married? Should I have a kid? Should I buy a car? Am I going to have a job? Will I have a college education? And here I was, a leader in a small town, and you have a lot of materialistic things, and yet at the same time you can't help people out. You're impotent when it really came down to leadership. I mean, I was the plant manager, had my own parking spot, my own secretary, my own offices. Okay, the city loves you because you're a large company, but when it really came down to helping people, you were no different than the janitor that they hired the previous day. Your job was to do your job, nothing more, nothing less. And if they said lay off the factory, I was to lay off the factory. And it was a very, very difficult time because you start questioning, how do we design a management system where people go to work every single day and just put their whole futures in people's hands, and they don't understand, whether it's going to have any sustainability or whether it's going to have any longevity. And, what kind of system do we have where people are asking me godlike questions about whether I should have a baby or not, okay? So finally, you deal with this for a period of time, the whole conceptual idea of leadership. And finally, I called everybody and said, hey, don't get married. Don't have a kid. The economic reality, the harsh reality is that we are not part of the core businesses, and there's a real good chance they'll close us. And I looked at them and said, look, we got three alternatives. One is that they'll close us. Two is that they may sell us. And three is that if we do survive, it could be really tough. So why don't we take a chance to try to buy the company? That was not a thought process. Okay, that was an instant reaction. That was trying to get rid of the guilt of saying to myself, at least I tried before I had to lay him off. I was only like 29 years old, so how would you like to have on your resume? Well, what was your last job? Well, I closed down a factory and I laid off the people. So I was expecting somebody in the audience to sit there and say, look, building an engine is a hell of a lot different than building a company. And they were scared. They were petrified. They'd have followed Lassie. They'd have followed Flicka. They'd have followed anybody that had any idea. They just didn't want to go into some promised land. And so I ended up going on this Odyssey. I went on this Odyssey to raise capital. All right, now I built engines, 360 engines a shift. I built 50-ton trucks. I had no conceptual idea on how to build a company. And so my first business plan that I went out there with, and I had supervised over 2,000 people in this 14-year run with the company. My first business plan was a letter of intent saying that we wanted to buy the place. I took my resume, my college degree, all my fancy courses, and my quality control ribbons and all my statistical process control degrees. And the bottom line is that the bankers looked at me and laughed. They go, what do you mean? What are you showing me this for? They began to ask me these silly questions like, well, when are you going to pay this money back? And I went, wow, really good question. I wasn't here to pay the money back. I was here trying to borrow money to buy the factory. So I went on this incredible Odyssey. And the Odyssey was that I was a factory person that spent 14 years learning how to build a product or service. In manufacturing, you have the metrics to measure a gnat's ass, okay? I mean, we are so metric driven, all right? But now I'm going out in the financial community to raise capital, and I cannot use one metric, all right, that I had learned in the entire time frame that I had been with the company. There was like two sets of metrics out there. There's a metric to build a product, and there's a metric to build a service. But the investors look at metrics differently, and they look metrics relating to the company. And as I began to have to write the business plans, okay, and to now transition myself from something that made a product to something now to make a company, all right, I had to learn the whole new reporting system, the balance sheets and the income statements and the cash flows, all right? And maybe I was lucky from this time, because in 1983, you didn't have spreadsheets. All right, we had those 18-column green, god-awful columns of paper, with red lines and number 2 pencils with erasers. And every banker wanted to see cash flow projections for 12 months. Every banker wanted to see 4 years worth of cash flow. All right. Every banker wanted to see it differently than the previous banker, depending on what cycle of hell I went to be able to borrow the money. Okay. And so after you manually write these things out at 3 o'clock in the morning, you begin to realize that this is not rocket science. Okay. That I could understand these metrics. All right. And then when I got denied the loan, I would really get angry. And I would get angry not at the lending institution. I got angry at the company that I worked for, because in the 14 years that I was at that company, they didn't think I could understand those metrics. They thought all I could do was build a truck, put it on the trailer, ship it to Russia, get it to them on time, and that all the financial aspects of the business was only going to be handled in sophisticated people's hands, okay, or I wasn't at a position where that confidentiality would be, trusted with me. And so, it was like I came from manufacturing, and I began to see two systems. I saw a system where they took these metrics, they consolidated them, they put them in a safe, and then they closed the safe. And then they said, okay, now we got to design a new way of managing the people to get what's in that safe, but we can't tell them what's in that safe. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there going, wow, to increase productivity, you take constraints out of the process. And so I made a promise to God that I'd say, if I ever got this loan, and there was I was trying to float a receivable that 200 banks already had $6 billion on, all right? So who was going to be the 201st bank? It didn't look real good. But I was totally economic illiterate, so I had no fear. I didn't know, okay, what the odds were against this. All I was trying to do was save 300 jobs, all right? That's what I was trying to do, was just save the job. I can't look at you right now and say I was there to stay, okay? I was trying to make absolutely certain I didn't have this guilt. And so I went to 54 financial institutions, all right, and got turned down by every single one of them. But I made this promise. I said, if I ever get this thing, I said, this aha moment that I have, okay, about combining the two metrics, that to build a company that is really productive from the standpoint of really understand what it takes to make a great company, that I saw that as a competitive edge. I thought I could differentiate my business by appealing to a higher level of intelligence than most companies, by teaching people the metrics of a great company. Because wouldn't you then have to have great products? Wouldn't you have to have great services to create a great company? That for 14 years in a leadership role, I was dumbing people down. I would take TQM to the ultimate level and say to people, You do this, it'll change your life forever. Well, it did. It laid them off. All right. It wasn't my aspiration. Okay. But if I could teach people cash flow, and I could teach them debt to equity, and I could teach them how to read a balance sheet, okay, maybe they will never ask me again, should they get married, should they have a car, should they have a kid, that they truly can understand that the health of a balance sheet and the health of the company go hand in hand. And so I made the promise. I said, boy, if I ever get this business, I ever get this company, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is teach people literacy. I'm going to teach them the metrics that they need to look for on creating something great and something sustainable. All right, because if they can keep their eyes focused in terms of those particular metrics, we will be innovative, we will be creative, because we had the skill level. We were overly skilled. We were always getting really good grades on our performance in the company, okay? It was mind-boggling that we could do so well and the company could do so badly. We were totally out of sync. And so my idea was to sit there and align everybody up and create a great company. Let's just create a great company. And let's forget about all the things that we learned in the past, and really focus on the metrics, this reporting system, because this is a reporting system that's going to have an impact on our lives. What happened was a Wall Street Journal came across my desk and it talked about a bank that was in serious trouble. And everybody was in trouble in 1982. Everybody was in trouble. And this one needed to have a higher net interest margins, and that's indicative that they got to take riskier loans. And you learn this language, okay? And I finally interpreted it as saying, well, they got to take risky loans. I said, well, this is the bank for me. They're looking for wild
We're
ones.
the perfect customer for that.
Absolutely. So I took my 54th business plan, flew to Chicago, and said, I hear you're booking bad loans. I got a doozy for you. And on February 1st, 1983, we booked the worst loan in corporate America. We ended up borrowing $8.9 million. And the irony of it is that we only had $100,000 worth of equity. So we were at 89-to-1 debt to equity buyout at 18% interest rates. And we were able then to start the company with our backs totally up against the wall with no room to move whatsoever, totally economically illiterate, all right? But at the same time, had no idea of the risks and no idea of how difficult it was going to be. All we knew is we had a chance.